All right, today we're talking about how to build conscious wealth by creating a life filled with abundance and impact, and how to really redefine how you think about money. My guest today is Brandon Hatton. I'll tell you more about him in a second, so stay tuned.
Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we feature top entrepreneurs, business leaders, and thought leaders and ask them how they built key relationships to get where they are today. Now, let's get started with the show.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I am the host of this show, and every week we feature smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs from all kinds of companies. And if you check out the archives, we've got Netflix and Grubhub, Redfin, Gusto, Kinko's, Activation Blizzard, Lending Tree, OpenTable, and many more. So check those out. And this episode is brought to you by Rise 25. At Rise 25, we help businesses to give to and connect to their dream relationships and partnerships. How do we do that? We do that by helping you to run and launch a podcast. We are the easy button for companies to launch and run a podcast. We do three things: strategy, accountability, and full execution. And we even invented the platform that people are calling the Wix of B2B podcasting. Is our platform, Podcast Copilot. So if you want to learn more about that, go to rise25.com, or you can email us at support@rise25.com. All right, quick shout out to previous guest Miran Oka of Aquatics Swim Schools in South Florida. She was a guest on this show, and I always ask my guests, hey, who would you recommend that I have on this show? And she recommended today's guest, who is Brandon Hatton. He's the President and Chief Investment Officer of Conscious Wealth. He began his career in financial services at Merrill Lynch Wealth Management, where he worked for a number of years, worked at Raymond James as well. But his story is an interesting one because he had a health scare along the way. He worked abroad. He saw the slums. He's also experienced a lot of people that have a lot of wealth, and he's going to talk about what builds happiness. And it might not be what you think it is. So we're going to talk about that here as well. But Brandon, hey, cool to have you here. And I love to get to know my guests a little bit about what they were like when they were younger and how that shapes who they are today. And you had quite the work ethic. You were out there in the hot sun doing landscaping jobs as a kid, and also chartering buses to Jimmy Buffett concerts, which is wildly specific. So I want to know about this. How do you get into chartering buses to Jimmy Buffett concerts?
I'm going to just say one thing, though. You said you bring on smart CEOs, and I never thought I was smart as a kid. I really never felt that way. By the way, thank you, John, for having me. And so when somebody said you should open up a landscaping company, one of my closest friends to this day, well, I just did it. And I was just really excited about making money, because I just wanted my own money as a kid. I mean, I'm sure we got an allowance. It wasn't substantial. And then with that same friend, we just saw a need. Everybody wanted to go to the concert. So we rented a bus, we sold 50 seats, and we bought 2 kegs. And I think we were 16 years old. Drinking age was 21. It wasn't 18. We weren't even close. And we had so much fun that the next year we had 3 buses, 150 people.
Wow.
And by the time we had our 3rd bus, there was a rule instituted in my high school handout that you could get expelled for renting buses.
And was this a profitable endeavor, or did all the profits get drank?
Oh no, it was quite profitable. I made more in that, I made more in that one day, enough so that I didn't have to do a full-time job at this. I could work 20 hours a week and then spend the rest of the time in the gym and running, getting ready for sports and stuff.
Wow. So yeah. So it's just once a year doing these Jimmy Buffett concerts. That's really cool. Now I want to ask you about, you have an interesting background. So you started off working on a cruise ship. It was one of the first jobs you had as a youth activities director. I've been on cruises before. They're super fun. I'm always curious about what the life is like being working on a cruise ship. So what was that like for you?
It was the most fun I've ever had. Yeah. I worked 18 hours a week. When I did work, I was playing bingo with kids, or I had a pool party. And before I went on cruise ships, I kind of just grew up in Cleveland, Ohio. I went to Miami, Ohio, which is not known as a very diverse school. And now I'm on a floating vessel of 1,400 passengers, maybe 800 crew from all over the world. And so different nationalities. A lot of different sexual orientation or different ways of looking at sexual orientation that I had never experienced firsthand.
Hmm.
All these different cultures and customs. It was just so eye-opening for me to just see how everybody was different and to feel it, to know it. It was amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, because I remember, on cruises we went on, a lot of times they have their home country underneath their name. So you have
Yeah.
people from all over the globe. Of course, a lot of the people who work on the cruise ships come from, you know, third world countries, from countries that are impoverished, and they don't have a lot of opportunity. And this is kind of a way up for them.
It is. It's a very segregated society underneath, at least it was. I wouldn't be surprised if it still is. It's very classist. I mean, I had the easy job. I was the American, um, having, doing youth activities. The people who are fixing the beds or making the food are working a lot harder than me and are away a year at a time, where I
Yeah.
was gone 3 months, be back, and then I have like 6 weeks off and go back and forth.
Yeah, I've heard it's
Yeah.
very tough on those folks working on the ships. And so after this experience, you say you weren't done traveling, you wanted to keep traveling some more. So naturally you opened a school in Egypt, which is an interesting jump from youth activities director to opening a school in Egypt. How did that come about?
So I was on the cruise ship and I was tired of visiting places. We just spent 2 days in Istanbul. Very cool. Spent 2 days in Moscow. Really neat. But then I never really got to feel a place, never got to get to really know it. And so I was telling this to a fellow teammate on the ship, and they said, "Well, why don't you sign up to be a teacher? You have a teaching degree." And I said, "Well, I've already tried that, but nobody wants a teacher with no experience." And she said, "Well, just call the recruiter, tell them you're willing to go anywhere in the world at a moment's notice if anybody breaks a contract." And I did that. And they called me and said, "How about Egypt? We're opening a new school." And I said, "When am I leaving?" And they said, "A week." And
Mm.
so I knew I was going to go somewhere. I didn't know where. I also knew I was tired of being in the same place. And as fun as being on a ship was, it really wasn't that fulfilling. I wanted like to do something that was like I wanted my life to start really because it's kind of purgatory. You're
You
just in
kind of feel
between
like you're in
places.
suspended animation kind of thing. You haven't started your
Yeah,
life. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And so you go to Egypt. Now, this is well before the Arab Spring. What was it like living there as an American?
As an American, I don't think it was any different than any other foreigner. It was busy. It was overwhelming, sense and noise and traffic. A full-time job as a teacher. It was my first time having my own apartment. It was my first time everything, and it was a lot. It was a bit overwhelming, and I couldn't wait to get out of there. As much as I loved the culture and the people, they were very welcoming. And somehow I got a job in Lebanon, where my great grandfather was from.
Hmm.
Well, all of my great grandparents, all eight of them, were born in Lebanon. Um, and I'm forever grateful for them making a decision to come to the United States. So I wanted to see where my grandparents and great grandparents came from. So I went there for 2 years and taught after that.
And what was the experience like of being in Lebanon? I understand you were actually there on 9/11.
So I got there in year 2000. The Israelis had just left after over a decade of occupation. Hezbollah was a bit of the dog who just caught the car. They really didn't know what to do with themselves. So I was there for it was about a year and a half of very peaceful times, unrestricted travel throughout Jordan, Syria, Lebanon. I would just get in the car and drive and see Hittite ruins or the old souk in Aleppo. It was amazing. September 11th was stressful, heartbreaking, but in a weird kind of way, I felt safer there than I felt than the people in the United States felt. Remember, we didn't know if there was going to be copycat attacks or gas attacks, or you couldn't open your mail with anthrax. And although I was the only, well, not the only, maybe there was one or two other U.S. history teachers in the country of Lebanon at the time, I felt very safe and welcome, nevertheless.
So you after that, what happens next? So did you after 9/11, did you decide that you wanted to come back to the United States, or did at any point did you feel like you weren't safe remaining? What was the next step for you?
Well, it was a bit stressful having your luggage packed underneath your bed. And I asked the ambassador, I was having dinner, and I said, "Hey, are you going to tell us when to evacuate?" And she said, "Of course. But if you wait for my message, you probably should have left 4 weeks ago."
Oof, jeez.
I said, "Okay, great." So it was stressful. I left. I knew there was going to be a war in the Middle East. I thought it was going to be Syria. I didn't know we were going to go for Iraq and Afghanistan. But I left more so because I was really overwhelmed with the amount of injustice and war and dictatorship and tension of the Middle East. It wasn't so much for my safety, it was just so overwhelming after 3 years of living there. And I did what I set out to do, which was to see where my family's from and to learn about my history. And so, I did a 180. I decided to go to Brazil, like the happiest place on earth. And I taught there for I taught there for 4 years. I did a 4-year contract teaching. I was teaching history with a concentration or focus on economics or politics in all of these places in U.S. schools or American schools. So my classrooms were like the United Nations. They were
Mm.
just kids from all over the world. It was really amazing.
And it was in Brazil that you witnessed real slums, not something you hadn't witnessed before. What were the slums in Brazil like, and how did they affect you?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of poverty in the Middle East, particularly in the refugee camps. But in Brazil, I spent time in the favelas volunteering. Um, and one of the things I'm most proud of my days teaching in Brazil is I set up, like we had this program, like a volunteer program. You know how all these high schools have a program where you just volunteer. And they would put kids in buses and just ship them to places. And then they would come back and I'd be like, "How was your day?" And they're like, "It was stupid," like every high school kid.
Hmm.
And so I said, "Well, what if instead of just shipping these kids out, we ask the kids what difference they want to make in the world? And then we ask them to go find an organization who does that and ask them what they need from us. And then they structure a program, pitch it to the nonprofit, and it's their like volunteer program." So at the time, I was reading Paulo Freire, which is a Brazilian uh, academic, really, and he wrote a book called The Pedagogy of the Oppressed. And the idea was that the wealthy people in this world are not there to save the oppressed, or the oppressor is not there to save the oppressed in his language, but actually the oppressed will set free the oppressor. And so that our children, our students were to go into these areas and figure out what could they learn from some of the financially poorest people in their country. And that, to me, that program, ups and downs, got a lot of positive and plenty of pushback on it. It was probably my proudest achievement of teaching.
Mm. You make your way back to the United States, and you get into financial management or wealth management.
Mhm.
Um, a few years of that, and then you have this health crisis, which impacts who you are today and the work that you do. This health scare. Take us back to that.
Sure. So in Gestalt, which you and I both know because we're part of EO, they have this thing called the paradoxical theory of change. And the idea is that change occurs when we become more like who we are. So change occurs not by becoming somebody different, but becoming somebody who we always were, and perhaps who we were even before we were born. So when I went into financial services, I lost a lot of who I was. I lost of who I was as a human being, or my commitment to social justice, my commitment to human rights, my commitment to my own health, my own social connections. So, sometimes the like wealth accumulation, which I achieved through this business, came at the destruction. Wealth creation came at the destruction of my health. And so I got to this point where I realized, I kind of got everything I want financially, but boy, my connections and my sense of health and perspective are really down. And decided either I have to quit the business or I have to rethink about how the business is. And so that was a big turning point for me. It took a while. but I realized that I didn't want to quit. I don't like quitting. Um, and I like to be in a place where I like to poke the bear, John. Like if I can challenge the system that I'm in,
Mm.
and people say, well, you can never do that. You can't really have these deep, meaningful conversations. They don't want to talk about that. They just want to talk about their money and say, no, I think we can do that. I think we can build a different system. I think I can survive in this ecosystem of wealth management. I think I can actually thrive. And so in many ways, I'm grateful for the scare that I had. Um, and I think moving forward, it's like, well, how can I do that without having a scare? But
You must have had pushback, though, working in these larger legacy financial institutions, which kind of have, for lack of a better term, cookie cutter approaches to the way that they approach clients, right? Did you get pushback?
well, yeah, so you call it cookie cutter. It's also pie charts. Everybody's in a pie chart. These are your stocks, these are your bonds, this is your whole model, and it's absolutely right. In fact, many people in those institutions don't even manage money anymore. They're just putting it into funds that are managed in a different state by six guys who are running billions of dollars. Like it's all very cookie cutter. It's not that pushback would be one way of saying it, and it's true. Like we just weren't allowed to do the things we were doing today. So one of the greatest things, the things that I enjoy most that we do today, is we help families have conversations about whatever needs to be talked about, whatever's not being talked about. Sometimes it's how do we as a family exit a company, or what do we do now that we've exited, or how do we talk to our children about inheritance? And this often includes working with the parents. Sometimes three generations. I have a licensed therapist on staff who works with me. I have other facilitators that facilitate with me. And it's just not allowed to happen in those firms. They won't allow for it. There's no model that allows you to charge and do that.
And so you end up starting your own firm, which is Conscious Wealth, which gives you more of the liberty to do these sorts of things. Would you say that it's still, do you have a model now where you're charging for this, or is it really more, you aren't necessarily charging for it in the sense that a traditional therapist would, like billing by the hour, but rather it's just a different, deeper way of serving the clients? I'm assuming that's the way that you approach it.
So our purpose is to cultivate abundance, which means that we want to help our clients know and feel that they have enough so they can go out and do good things. And so that permeates everything we do, the conversations we have, how we talk to people, how we invest. And we actually believe that the way that you invest can help people feel more secure and help them be more secure. And so that's what you're talking about, and that all exists. And some of our clients say, that's not enough for us. I really need you to come into our living room, sit down with our family, and help us have conversations. And please bring another facilitator with you, or maybe I do the facilitation on my own. And that is charged on an hourly basis.
Interesting.
And sometimes, like some of our families do not invest with us at all. All they're doing is using our facilitation services.
Oh, interesting.
I believe the maximum benefit is when they're doing both.
Mm.
When they're investing with us and having the conversations. Because the reason there's two of us in a room is I have a really strong understanding of investments and how money works. And my partners, other facilitators, really understand how family dynamics and emotions work. And when those two are put together, a lot can be done. Mm. And when they're in isolation, it just doesn't, it's not as powerful.
How do you approach the clients that are resisting having those difficult conversations?
Well, I think it's important to meet them where they're at. And so I would say persistence is very important. Sometimes we'll find one spouse in the family does not want to have the conversation, and the other one is dying to have the conversation. I bet you if you polled families with financial means and say, what are we going to tell our matriarch and patriarch as an example of a traditional family, or however the family breaks out in terms of gender? what are we going to tell our kids? One's going to feel really strongly one way, and the other's going to feel strongly the other. And so what we're trying to do is find common points between them. And almost always the common point is we want our kids to be successful. We want our kids to be thriving in the world. Okay, so then the question isn't what should we tell them something or we shouldn't, or should we set up this structure, should we set up that structure, but to understand what are the underlying beliefs they have, what makes a person successful, and how can we get the two leaders, assuming there are two leaders, to get on the same page so that we can start having meaningful conversations. Because absence of those conversations, other narratives are formed, and those narratives are usually not correct or helpful.
You developed these 4 pillars as a way of approaching this these topics. You want to talk about the way that you've organized those pillars?
Yeah, sure. So we talk about conscious wealth. And the reason we use conscious wealth is because sometimes when people talk about wealth, all they're talking about is one type of wealth, financial wealth. And it's just not enough. It's not reflective of the complexities of life or the meaning of what we're doing here. And so we talk about the other 3 pillars besides financial wealth. We talk about health. As I mentioned before, if you don't, the expression that I love the most is the healthy person has a million wishes and the unhealthy has only one wish, right? And so you take away health from somebody, it doesn't matter how much money they have. It's a real form of well-being. We also talk about connections, right? And so you can have all the money in the world, but if you don't have the connections, you don't have the strong friends and family, not only do you have no one to share it with, you're going to share it with people for less amount of time. Like statistically, you will not live as longer and you will have less of a lifespan. And the final is perspective, this idea of mindset, like a growth mindset, a mindset of gratitude, which you and I have spoke of, which is so important. Because you can have all the money in the world, but if you're not grateful for it, what good is it? And so gratitude, perspective, financial health, wealth, and health are the 4 pillars we speak of. And all of them need to be addressed. And I believe all of them need to be addressed and can be addressed through wealth management to some degree or another.
One of the challenges that successful families experience is how to, a lot of times you have a generation that was, raised in poverty or didn't have means, and it was the drive to get away from that made them who they are, that allowed them to build their business, that allowed them to be successful. And then their kids are raised at a much higher standard of living. And so they wonder, how can I impart on my kids, the next generation, the same spirit, the same drive that I had? And I see that over and over again with a lot of different successful founders and entrepreneurs and things like that. So what are your thoughts on that subject? How to inspire the next generation to not just take what they've given and kind of live a fat, lazy, happy life, but to achieve things with their life?
Yeah. So you said a lot there, and
sorry, I packed a little too much in.
No, it's a great question. It's a great question. So what you're talking about is a phenomenon known immigrants or natives to wealth. The immigrant to the wealth is the one who was was born into a sense of scarcity or poverty, had a ton of drive, made lots of money, and their heirs, their children, may be natives to wealth. That's all they've known as money. So the first thing I would say is it is unfair for an immigrant of wealth to expect a native of wealth to act and think the same way as them. It's just they haven't lived the same life experiences.
Yeah.
And so accepting your heirs for who they are based on the experience they have is very important. Beyond that, a lot of people will say, well, I don't want my kids to be spoiled. And I think that's a very fair point. Nobody likes spoiled kids. But what does spoiled mean? How do you define spoiled? How do you define not spoiled? Name of a great book. And that's a really important point and a measuring stick that if we have that, then we can start having conversations. What does entitlement mean, right? And so a lot of times the lack of conversation that occurs around money is the fear of children being spoiled or lazy or entitled if they find out. And I would argue that the risk of them becoming any of those things are greater without dialogue
Mm,
or dialogue. So, uh, summarizing, defining what is spoiled and expect and knowing that if your children had different life than you, they're going to have a different outlook on life.
yeah. Um, I also want to ask you about, imagine you've experienced this where you have clients that have achieved an outcome. Maybe they've exited their business, maybe they sold their
Hmm.
business, whatever.
Hmm.
And then it's kind of like, what's next? And they don't know
Yeah.
what's next. They don't know what they
Yeah.
want to do next, because they've kind of achieved what they wanted to achieve. Talk us through that. How do you approach that dilemma?
That's so big. Yeah. Yeah. I get it. And it's part of me all the time. Like it's part of my reality all the time is like, who am I without my work? I love my work so much, but who am I without it?
Yeah.
Um, and I think that's the importance that I try to remind myself as I'm going through it is to have other identities outside of work. So the one day when I can no longer do what I'm doing for whatever reason, or I decide no longer to do it, that I have other things to lean upon. The big thing, though, I would say the most common advice I give it to your question is you just exited a company. For a year, just take a victory lap. For a year, don't make any major purchases. For a year, don't start a new business. Just allow the 5 or 50 years of work to just kind of settle down and help you ground and let the dust settle a bit and figure out, be comfortable with that silence, be comfortable with that lull. That's an activity we can do when we retire, and it's an activity I can do every day at the end of the day, you know?
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I also want to ask you about you. This is a difficult conversation to have with people. Sometimes when you create a business, as you have, which kind of breaks the mold, there can be a tension between clients coming to you for like the traditional thing that they think of when they think of a wealth management firm and what you know they need or what you want to provide. And it's interesting because you have a book, you do speaking, you've got a card
Uh-huh.
game on your website, you've got a course on
Yes.
your website. So talk a little bit
Yeah.
about like, adapting to the new way of communicating. We have social media, we have YouTube, we have all these kind of different ways that people communicate and also learn and educate themselves. And I get the sense that you are at least trying different sorts of things in order to get your message out there and to communicate with the market about some of these principles.
Yeah. So carrying this message is very important to me and expanding the message and telling people, or allowing people to think about wealth in a different way is very important to me. It's part of what I think is a way, I believe to be a way that we can make our society more loving, kind, and just. And there's so much tension around money and allowing that to just be lightened up a bit, making a fun card game to talk about money, doing talks, spending time with you here is all very valuable for my personal mission, as it is defined now, right? When a client comes to us and they say, look, I just want wealth management, um, that's fine. It's fine as long as we can see we like to say that we work with like-hearted clients. They don't have to be like-minded. They can think politically different than us. They can think differently about everything. But as long as we feel that their heart is in the right place and they want to take care of themselves and their family and do good in the world, however they define that, and that can be defined a million different ways, we'll work with them in the capacity that they need. And sometimes over time, they'll say, hey, I hear you're doing this other stuff. We'd like to work with you there. Great. Or they want to stick to a lane. That's okay too. Um, and I tell the team this all the time, we're here to serve. And we're here to serve people where they are and what they need. And preferably we want to serve people who will accept our help, right? And that want to work with us.
Yeah. Actually,
Yeah.
you mentioned the team, and I want to ask you about that because I know that you started the company in Atlanta. You moved to South Florida, as one
Hmm.
does during a pandemic. A lot of
Yeah.
people were doing that, and now you're on the way moving back there. And it's interesting to me because there's the issue of like the way you've branded yourself and conscious wealth and everything that attracts a certain type of clientele. It also attracts a certain type of worker, person who wants to join a company, like work for a company like that.
Yeah.
So talk about building up this company by deliberately designing it in a different way from the JP Morgans of the world.
I'm so happy you asked that. Thank you. That's something I'm really, really proud of. So one of the things that we do that Mirren, that you spoke of before, encourage us to do is we do a year compass every year. And then it's this activity in December where every individual looks back at their own personal year and all the highlights and lowlights, and then they look forward what they want, and they fill out this entire document in confidentiality, and then we go out and get pizza and beer, and we share whatever we feel like sharing. One of the questions is, if 2024 was a movie, what would it be called? And so everybody's sharing these things. We also have meetings. We also just go out for pizza and beer every month or two, and we might have a book club talking about the purpose of life. Or what does it mean? What does conscious wealth mean to you? Right? Can start really digging into the brand so that all of them feel like they can be part of this brand. It is, I believe I'm part of the conscious capitalist movement. I believe business is a force for good. And so I'm not just serving clients. I'm really serving. I tell my teammates all the time, I'm here to serve you and y'all are here to serve me. Like that's what we're doing. And helping them become better human beings and vice versa. And they could go somewhere else probably and get a bigger paycheck tomorrow. But they might not find a place where they belong. They might not see the scalability or the opportunity to grow in other places. And they choose to stay. And I'm glad because I really care for them and vice versa. Yeah.
Brandon, this has been great. I want to wrap up with my gratitude question. So I'm a big fan of practicing gratitude and also giving our guests a little bit of a space here at the end to acknowledge any peers, contemporaries, mentors who've helped them in their journey, maybe during the health crisis or some other time. Anyone in particular you'd want to acknowledge?
Well, I would probably acknowledge the Gestalt Institute of Cleveland and the whole faculty I worked with there. I started a course just right before COVID, and it was all throughout COVID. And by doing a 2-year facilitation training program with them, I learned so much. I gained so much wisdom from all of them, or it was at least I got to experience their wisdom and incorporate it in ways that I wanted to, and it's transformed my career. But it's also transformed just the way I feel as a human being, how I interact with the world, how I interact with other people, how I show up. I'm more present. And all of that was, for me, accomplished through the lens of Gestalt and the faculty, which certainly don't do it for the money. They're just really there to help people become better humans. So that was a big turning point in my career. Very grateful for all of them.
I've never heard of it before, so thank you for bringing it to our attention. We'll certainly put it in the show notes. And Brandon, thank you so much. Where can people go to learn more about you and Conscious Wealth and connect with you if they have any questions?
That's it, consciouswealth.com.
Awesome. Brandon, thanks so much.
Thank you, John.
Thanks for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast. We'll see you again next time, and be sure to click subscribe to get future episodes.